November 2001. Bill Gates stepped onto a neon-lit stage in Las Vegas alongside Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, clutching a bulky, translucent green machine that looked more like a piece of industrial equipment than a toy. Microsoft was hemorrhaging billions, bleeding cash into a black hole of research and development just to challenge the Japanese hegemony of Sony and Nintendo. It was a kamikaze mission into a market where software giants usually went to die, a desperate attempt to own the American living room. 2 decades later, that gamble has evolved into a multi-billion-dollar ecosystem, a digital empire that claims to democratize gaming for the entire planet. But beneath the green glow and the promises of power your dreams lies a cold corporate calculus that is currently cannibalizing its own creators. From shuttered legendary studios to a hardware business in a terminal tailspin, the dream is being liquidated to satisfy a $1 trillion motherboard. This is the story of how Microsoft killed the console to save the brand. To understand the precipice upon which Xbox now stands, one must understand the scorched earth policy of its birth. In the late 90s, Microsoft looked at the Sony PlayStation and saw a Trojan horse. They feared a future where the PC was relegated to the office and the television was controlled by a proprietary Japanese operating system. Xbox wasn't born out of a love for play, it was born out of a fear of irrelevance. The original Xbox was literally a PC stuffed into a box, powered by a DirectX architecture designed to extend Windows' reach into the carpeted dens of suburbia. It was a machine built on the back of Halo, a lightning-in-a-bottle phenomenon that gave Microsoft a cultural edge it had never possessed. The 2000s were the golden era of the green brand.
The Xbox 360 was a masterpiece of market timing, arriving a full year before the PlayStation 3 and offering an online service, Xbox Live, that turned gaming into a social network before the term even existed. Microsoft was the king of the mountain, but the crown was heavy and the medal was flawed. Beneath the success of the 360 lay the red ring of death, a catastrophic hardware failure rate that nearly cost the company $1 billion in repairs and replacements. It was a warning sign. The hardware was a liability, a physical anchor dragging down a software company's soaring ambitions. The pivot toward the end began in 2013. This was the year the hubris finally boiled over. At a disastrous reveal event, Xbox leadership pitched the Xbox One not as a gaming machine, but as an all-in-one media center that required a constant internet connection and effectively killed the used game market. They wanted to turn your hobby into a subscription service a decade before the world was ready. The backlash was nuclear. Sony didn't even have to innovate, they just had to point at Microsoft and laugh. Within months, Xbox went from the industry leader to a distant runner-up, a position it has never managed to escape. When Phil Spencer took the reins in 2014, he was hailed as the savior. He wore graphic tees, talked about the gamers, and promised a return to form. But Spencer's strategy wasn't about winning a console war, it was about ending the concept of the war entirely by buying up the battlefield. If you can't beat the competition, you buy them. This was the start of the Great Annexation. First came Mojang and Minecraft for $2.5 billion. Then came the $7.5 billion acquisition of ZeniMax, the parent company of Bethesda and the creators of Fallout and the Elder Scrolls. The industry watched in awe as Microsoft began to assemble a private army of developers, but the true Leviathan was yet to come.
In January 2022, Microsoft announced its intent to buy Activision Blizzard for a staggering $69 billion. It was the largest tech acquisition in history, a move so massive it triggered regulatory alarms across the globe. Microsoft argued they were the underdog, a humble third-place player just trying to compete. It was a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. By the time the ink dried on the Activision deal, Microsoft Gaming had become a sprawling, bloated bureaucracy. They now owned Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, and Candy Crush. They had the IP, they had the studios, they had the cloud, but they no longer had a reason for the box to exist. This is the central irony of the modern Xbox era. The more successful Microsoft becomes as a publisher, the more redundant the Xbox console becomes as a product. The launch of Xbox Game Pass, the so-called Netflix of games, was the final nail in the coffin of the hardware-first philosophy. By offering every first-party game on PC and via the cloud for a monthly fee, Microsoft effectively told their audience they didn't need to buy an Xbox, and the audience listened. While the PlayStation 5 has moved over 50 million units, the Xbox Series X and S are languishing in the shadows, struggling to reach half that number. In Europe and Asia, the brand has practically evaporated from retail shelves. The hardware is a relic, a vestigial organ of a company that has realised it's much more profitable to be the landlord of the digital storefront than the manufacturer of the bricks. But the cost of this transition is being paid in human capital and creative soul. 2024 has been a year of unprecedented carnage for the people who actually make the games. In a series of ruthless corporate restructurings, Microsoft laid off nearly 2,000 employees from its gaming division. Then came the shockwaves that broke the internet, the closure of Tango Gameworks and Arcane Austin.
Tango Gameworks had just released Hi-Fi Rush, a vibrant, critically acclaimed hit that was held up by Microsoft executives as the gold standard for what Game Pass could achieve. It was a creative triumph, a game with a soul in a sea of live service sludge. And for their reward, the studio was executed. The message was clear. Quality doesn't matter. Engagement metrics do. If a studio doesn't fit the long-term logistical growth of the Game Pass algorithm, it is deleted. This is the dark truth behind the Play Anywhere slogan. When a trillion-dollar company takes over an artistic medium, the art becomes a line item. The internal logic at Microsoft has shifted. They are no longer a console company competing with Sony, they are a cloud company competing with Google and Amazon. They don't care if you play on an Xbox, a phone, or a smart fridge, as long as you are paying the monthly tithe. The rumours are now swirling that the ultimate betrayal is imminent. For years, the one thing keeping the Xbox hardware relevant was exclusivity. If you wanted to play Halo, Gears of War, or Forza, you needed the box. But the walls are crumbling. Microsoft has already begun porting former exclusives like Sea of Thieves and Hi-Fi Rush to the PlayStation 5. There are whispers that even the crown jewels, Halo and Indiana Jones, could eventually make the jump. If every Xbox game is available on a PlayStation, why would anyone ever buy an Xbox? The answer is they wouldn't. And that is exactly what Microsoft wants. They are preparing for a post-console future, where they occupy the same space as Sega, but on a much more terrifying scale. They want to be the universal publisher, the entity that owns the content everyone else has to host. But this shift threatens to destroy the very identity of the medium. Consoles provided a curated, stable environment for developers and players alike. They were the anchors of the industry.
Without a competitive Xbox hardware platform, Sony is left as a monopoly in the high-end console space, a scenario that historically leads to stagnation and price gouging. Meanwhile, the Xbox brand is being hollowed out, turned into a software label that carries the baggage of its corporate parent without the charm of its rebellious origins. We are witnessing the final stages of a corporate metamorphosis. The green logo that once stood for a bold, brash alternative to the status quo has been absorbed into the grey monolith of Microsoft's Azure cloud services. The developers who built the foundations of the brand are being cast aside in favour of a consolidated, risk-averse megastructure. The Xbox as we knew it, the bulky machine under the TV, the fierce rival to the PlayStation, the home of the midnight launch, is already dead. It has been replaced by a ghost in the machine, a subscription service that demands constant growth at the expense of its own history. Microsoft didn't lose the console war, they simply decided they were too big to keep fighting it, opting instead to buy the world and charge us rent to live in it. The console is no longer the product, you are the product. Your data, your subscription and your attention are the only metrics that remain. As the last of the exclusive walls fall and the remaining studios are folded into the collective, we are left to wonder what was actually gained. We have more games than ever, accessible on more devices than ever, yet the industry feels more fragile and cynical than it did in 2001. This is the story of a dream that was too big to survive its own success. This is the story of how the quest for total market dominance turned a beloved gaming icon into a cautionary tale of corporate cannibalism. This is the end of Xbox as we know it and the beginning of a cold digital empire where the players are just entries in a database.